Good evening, everybody. It is a real honor to be a part of such a special evening. Is this all right? Sound okay? Where you're taking something that started on that day in 1986 and looking back over 25 years, and at this group all gathered to think about the next 25 and how to continue to support it. Of course, Alex making me think about 1986 is making me think about where I was in 1986. So I was a sophomore in high school. I think 1986 was the year I made the poor decision to have an arrow drawn into my hair. And I was also, and have been a lifelong Red Sox fan. So thanks, Alec, for trying to rattle me by bringing some really uncomfortable memories to the fore. But a night like tonight is really, it's about honoring the transformational power of teaching and learning, and it's about taking stock of where we are. Taking stock of where we are in terms of aim high, and taking stock of where we are as a nation, as a city, as people committed to the unmatched promise of education and its capacity to transform our democracy. And so I'm going to talk to you about those things, about the transformational power of teaching and learning and about taking stock of where we are. And I want to just frame it with a story because just last month, actually, I returned to the place where I began my own teaching career, which is a little unusual start because I started my teaching career at a public university in Beijing, China. And I started teaching right after I graduated from college. Thought I wanted to be a teacher, wasn't sure. Hadn't been back to China since then, so you can imagine the difference between 1994 and 2011. But while I was there, I was thinking about both of those issues in a slightly different way. So I know that there are teachers in the room, both current and former, and so whether you were a teacher or not, I want you to try to imagine what it's like the morning before your first ever solo act as a teacher. Kind of unique combination of anxiety and exhilaration. As everybody knows that's an educator, we don't get in it for the money. So there is a deep missionary spirit that is calling us to the work, and that brings the exhilaration. It is finally the time where you will inherit your classroom and a group of kids, and you'll be trying to impact them. And there's the sheer terror because you know that the moment you walk into that classroom and you start talking, all of those eyes will be focused on you, wondering what happens next. And I don't know if my first ever teaching experience was made easier or more difficult by the fact that it was at a public university in Beijing, China. But I was only 23. I was teaching kids. I was teaching students that were 2 years younger than I was. They were very advanced in English so that it was no longer the idea to take a class with around grammar. They wanted to take a subject class. So I was there to teach a history and literature course at Beijing Normal University. And that morning before my first class, I had a whole series of anxiety dreams. It was very hard for me to make it through the night. So I had, one where, and it was all about the class. So I had one where the first class went really well, and I had that dream moment where you're talking with the student afterwards about something that's really interesting. And then I forgot about the next class, and I had the anxiety dream of running in late. I had one dream where, the classic dream, many of you have probably had it, where I was up teaching and I realized I wasn't wearing pants. And on and on. So by the time I finally woke up at 7 in the morning and put on my most professional-looking clothes and walked across the campus at Beijing Normal University, I felt like I'd already been teaching for hours. And I was, I got to the classroom and I heard the voices of the students chatting with each other. Many of them hadn't seen each other in 4 months. Took that last deep breath, hearts beating fast, opened the door and gave a hearty, "Good morning." Nothing. No reaction. Everybody goes quiet. Okay. It's fine, prepared for this. So I have my syllabus. I'm passing them out, or syllabi, I guess. I pass them out to all of the students. I start explaining the types of things that we'll be reading and what the year will be focused on. No reaction at all from anybody. To the point, it's China, right? So the point I'm thinking, maybe I'm in the wrong classroom because maybe they don't even speak English. And then it was finally time, 10 minutes in to do, I turned my back on the class for the first time. I think it was to write my name on the board. And so as I turned my back and started writing, the moment I turned my back, this group of students that up to this point had uttered not a sound, let out a very loud and audible, ooh. I looked back and pants, check. And they laughed, and I was like, all right, this is good, we're communicating. So I said, what's so funny? And one student raised her hand in the back, and she said, in China, we believe people who are left-handed are extremely intelligent. So obviously I said, in America, we also believe that to be true. And from there, my teaching career was launched. But actually, what I was reflecting on when I was back there was that what I learned later that day was that in each of my classes at Beijing Normal University, there was a student who had been assigned to my class, whose identity was supposed to remain anonymous to me. He or she was a member of the Communist Party, and his or her job was to make sure that classroom conversations with a foreign instructor always stayed within acceptable guidelines. Now, I should say that these students that were supposed to be anonymous quickly revealed themselves to me, and I still am close with them, and we spent like every minute of office hours respectfully talking about the pros and cons of our different societies. But it does send a pretty clear message, right, about what is and isn't expected in that classroom. And at first it was very shocking to me, but then when I thought about it, it made perfect sense. Actually, my classroom in Beijing was perfectly aligned to reflect the values of Chinese society and of the ideal Chinese citizen. This is a society that believes that the mindset of the community is more important than the mindset of the individual. And the only way that you can possibly maintain order and control in a country of 1 billion people is by, well, the current model is by robust economic freedom and sharply circumscribed social and personal freedoms. And when I was back now in 2011, so in 1994, people were still like walking, there's still lots of bikes and ox-drawn carts and just a few cars. And now, since the Olympics, it has exploded. Deng Xiaoping's vision of socialism with Chinese characteristics is in full bloom. And so what struck me was actually how aligned, if we can suspend judgment for a moment, how aligned China's schools are around what it values at the highest level as a society. And then I come back to the United States, right, where the first people talk about us as the world's first new nation because your standing in the civic order here was not determined by bloodlines and kinship, but by a fundamental shared allegiance to principles and ideals. And so, of course, it's in America's public schools that we will find the greatest instances of children being encouraged to respectfully challenge the status quo, to disagree and debate respectfully, to tackle the tough issues. Well, not so much. I taught in New York City, and when I first went there, I encountered students that had never, and I taught history and English. I encountered students that had never before been asked what they thought about the material they were studying. And so they were unprepared to answer it. They just wanted to know, what were they going to be tested on? And it made me realize then that if we're not careful, we can take some of our founding principles for granted, and at least in the students that I encountered in New York and that I've continued to see in too many, not all, but too many schools across the country, in the way that if you have, like, let's say you break an arm and you're wearing a cast and like one of your muscles is isolated for a while, it withers and weakens over time from lack of use. So too is it with our capacity to use our voice effectively and with integrity in co-creating our common public world. And so we have a problem in this country. Those of you that saw Waiting for Superman, raise your hand if you saw Waiting for Superman. Waiting for Superman in the house. Remarkable, right? It's an education documentary, and just about everybody has seen it. Do you remember the scene? There were a lot of animated graphics in Waiting for Superman, where, and it's an animated graphic of a classroom. And it's a classic classroom. I don't care what age you are in this room. It's the classroom that you probably learned in, where the teacher was up at front and the children were in rows. And what happens in the graphic, and they use these animated graphics in the film to try to make points about statistics, suddenly all of the tops of the students' heads come off. and revealing themselves literally, according to the graphic, to be empty vessels. There is nothing there. And the teacher is holding this giant ladle, which is meant to represent like the ladle of knowledge. Anybody remembering this vaguely? And so the pitcher is like filled with letters and numbers. And what the teacher is trying to do is she's walking up and down the rows, and she's trying to pour, with the best of intentions, she's trying to pour the knowledge into the heads of these truly empty vessels, these passive kids that are just sitting there waiting to be taught. The purpose of the graphic in this most seminal education documentary of our time is to show that because of all of these external factors in K-12 education, her aim is off. And so what she's doing is she's missing her targets, and the knowledge is pouring helplessly onto the ground, and we're missing this opportunity. In other words, the assumption is that the role of the teacher in 21st century American education is to pour knowledge into passive, empty vessels. Not exactly a recipe for a robust and healthy democracy. But the good news, of course, is that there are programs like Aim High. I mean, you all have discovered the special sauce. The last 5 years, I've been gathering stories from people all around the country, and actually even around the world, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to surface that, we actually know more than we think we do about what powerful teaching and learning looks like. It's not like we have to look at that misalignment of waiting for Superman and the alignment of China and think, woe is us, there's no way we can figure this out. The answers are right here. And so what I've done is I've asked all kinds of people, from Arnie Duncan to Al Franken to President Obama to people you've never heard of, what was your most powerful personal learning experience? I don't care how old you were. I don't care if it was in school or out of school. When and where were you when you learned best? Just think about it for a moment. Situate it for yourself. And I've gathered all these stories, and the purpose in gathering all these stories was to actually see, are there some common attributes across all of these lived experiences? If we were to stitch the nation's learning stories together, what would it show us about the core components of a transformational learning environment? In other words, I don't care if it's about Outward Bound or third grade or Aim High, or if you were 5 or if it was last month, just that it was a deeply meaningful experience to you and real learning occurred. And what clearly rose to the surface is what the people in this room already know, which is powerful, transformational learning environments, the kind of environments that change the trajectories of a person's life, are, to differing degrees, challenging, engaging, relevant, meaning relevant to the learner. Nobody asks, why am I learning this in a transformational learning environment? Supportive and experiential. Challenging, engaging, relevant, supportive, and experiential. There it is. And what is so encouraging to me, having the opportunity to be able to work in lots of different communities around the country, is to start to get to know more deeply organizations like Aim High. Because you do this. You know that you do this. But actually, from the perspective of an outsider, let me tell you real quick what I think the ingredients to your special sauce are, how you take those 5 things and you breathe new life into them. The first is you recognize that it's not just the school year. Let's start there. That all of us, members of every community, right, members of the city of San Francisco, our objective must be to give young people as many meaningful opportunities to discover something powerful about themselves in school, out of school, summertime, wintertime, it doesn't matter. And so the first thing that you've done is you've filled a void, and you've given children, young people, an opportunity to continue to have opportunities to discover something powerful about themselves beyond the school year. So that's one. Number 2 is you recognize that it's not just about Aim High. Alec talked about the thing that makes Aim High successful is its partnerships, whether it's the local schools or members of the private sector or members of the philanthropic community or individuals or alums, or even most importantly, if we think about Aim High, parents, right? The Aim High summer programs, parents play an integral part. They are a part of it. They are welcomed into it. They feel that they are a part of it. Essential. And the third, what's the third? Just saying. I live in D.C., so, like all we do is talk about political stuff. No, I remember what the third is. It's that it's not just about academic learning. The biggest problem I would suggest that we have in our current efforts to try to transform public, private education in this country is we continue to overvalue academic learning. And look, I'm a former teacher. It's important, right? But back to those experiences, I got one person, so, we're drinking later. I'll find you. If you think about Aim High, right? Every morning you begin with a circle that brings all of those young people together. And in all the stories that I've gathered, what strikes me is people often, their most powerful learning experience is not even about what they learned per se, which again is not to say that what we learn is unimportant. It is. It matters. But what people remember, what changes them, is learning something that alters the way they see themselves, the way they understand their strengths, their weaknesses, what they want to do in the world. And that is a fundamental interpersonal transaction. Powerful transformational learning involves academics and is not limited to academics. It is about social, emotional, spiritual, vocational, civic growth. And Aim High recognizes that. It is integral to the work that it does. Just today, I had lunch with a former student of mine who I haven't seen since she graduated from high school. I taught in New York City. And she's 31. So I feel old. I'm like, you're 31? I remember her when she was 18. But we were having lunch, and I was hearing all about her new work, and she's a documentary filmmaker. She's doing work with National Geographic. And then she mentioned something about the class that we shared together and why it was memorable. And so I wasn't even so much even thinking about tonight, but I was like, well, I'm curious, like, what do you remember? And she's like, don't take this the wrong way, but I actually don't remember any of the books that we read. Typical, right? She said, but I remember the energy of the class. And the one thing she said, she's like, I remember that you told us, and I hope this was not actually in class time. She's like, I remember that you told us what your 5 most valuable desert island albums were. And she's like, actually, I don't even remember 5 of them, but I remember that 2 of them were Public Enemy and Joni Mitchell's Blue. And I was thinking about that after. I was like, I think that's cool. But actually, the reason I think it's relevant is because I think the reason that Carrie remembers those 2 albums is because those 2 albums somehow fit into the larger narrative of her understanding her own path. Like that, because those 2 artists are important to her. And so something about seeing somebody else modeling the spirit of curiosity and inquiry and trying to make connections in different ways is what she remembers. This is what Aim High does every day, every year for 25 years. So as we think about looking forward and not just looking back, yes, it's important for an organization like this to continue to survive, to have your ongoing support. And Aim High needs more than just your financial support. All of us together have to start thinking about a different type of engagement and advocacy. We need to be active participants in creating the same sort of alignment between what we value and how our schools operate that is happening in China. And we don't have to look far, right? The beauty of this country is over 200 years ago, we articulated a vision that we still haven't been able to live up to. And that's okay, but the vision itself is pure. And programs like Aim High get us closer to it, and you don't have to look any farther than the words that started the whole experiment. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. So with that, thank you so much for the honor of being able to be a part of this evening. Please continue to show your support for Aim High, and please keep working and thinking with each other about other ways that we can bring about a deeper shift that creates that Aim High special sauce in lots of other places. Thank you very much. Thank you. And no, I'm not waiting for a standing O. I have another job to do. So now I get to pass the baton and briefly introduce Zoe Duskin, and it must be brief, but I have to just let you know how I met Zoe Duskin. So about a year ago, I was a part of a founding group of a new school in DC. And you know, the most important thing you can do if you're a new school is you've got to find the right principal. And we were struggling, and we were interviewing lots of folks, and then suddenly this resume comes across for this incredibly smart, impossibly young person. I mean, a 20-something applying to be a principal in a school. And I thought, and other people thought, she's amazing. There's no way we can hire somebody that young. We have to at least interview her. Spoke to her on the phone and realized, oh my God, this person actually, it's not just on the resume. This is a wise person beyond her years. We've got to bring her to DC and meet her in person. And then she came to DC, and I thought, Zoe Duskin is one of those rare superstars in the field. This is somebody that is going to be a leader presently and in the future. You talk about the next 25 years. And I realized that she was an Aim High graduate. So Zoe is now in the midst of her first year as the inaugural principal of the Inspired Teaching School in Washington, D.C. She is fabulous, and she is up next. So please welcome my friend Zoe Duskin.